The conclave of 7 rings had seen 10,000 champions rise and fall across its centuries of operation. Worlds had risen to prominence on the strength of a single fighter. Empires had crumbled when their greatest warrior knelt in the dust of the arena floor. No one had ever seen a human compete. Until today. Mara Ellison stood at the edge of the fighter's tunnel, her breath steady, her eyes adjusting to the blinding white light of the arena. The crowd noise was immense, a wall of sound from 200,000 spectators packed into the terraced rings of the conclave, but she had learned, over 3 years of Deathworld conditioning, to file sensation into categories. Useful. Not useful. Threat. Not threat. The crowd was not a threat. She rolled her shoulders and stepped into the light. The reaction from the stands was immediate and visceral. Not cheering. Not booing. Something stranger, a ripple of confused murmur, like a stone dropped into a still lake. 200,000 voices asking each other the same question, what is that? She was small. That was the first thing they noticed. By Galactic Coalition standards, she was almost comically undersized. The Dravani warriors who typically competed in the open circuit averaged 2.8 meters tall and massed somewhere north of 400 kilograms. The Kretzol were smaller but armored in natural chitin that could deflect a plasma discharge. Even the diminutive Plixians, the smallest regular competitors, stood a head taller than Mara's 1.76 meters of unaugmented human flesh. She wore no chitin. No energy shielding. No reinforced exoframe. Standard cadet training gear, close-fit tactical bodysuit, mag boots, fingerless gloves with grip tape on the palms. The kind of equipment that other species wore to warm up. The announcer's voice, translated simultaneously into 43 languages by the arena's broadcast systems, rolled across the arena like thunder. Representing the Terran Confederation, competing as a registered Deathworld cadet under open-circuit exhibition rules, Mara Ellison of Earth. Silence. Not polite silence. The kind of silence that happens when 200,000 beings are trying to process the same impossible thing at once. Then came the laughter. It started in the upper rings, the cheaper seats, filled with gamblers and thrill-seekers and species who had no particular opinion about humans one way or another. It spread downward. Even the dignitary boxes were not immune. The praetor of the Keth Alliance, a being who had not smiled publicly in 30 years, was observed pressing a claw over his mandibles to suppress something that looked very much like amusement. Mara heard it all. She catalogued it under not threat and kept walking. Her opponent was already in position at the far end of the arena floor. Kale Veyron. Even by Dravani standards, he was exceptional, 3.1 meters of engineered combat biology, his species' natural bioluminescent threat display active along the spinal ridges of his back, casting the sand around him in shifting pulses of violet and gold. He was the reigning open-circuit champion. He had won 47 consecutive matches over 6 years. The Galactic Sports Consortium had stopped scheduling challengers for him because no one would pay the entrance fee. He had agreed to this exhibition match as a favor to the Coalition's diplomatic outreach program. A gesture of goodwill toward the newly admitted Terran Confederation. He would be careful, of course. He would not kill the human. The Conclave's rules forbade fatal strikes in exhibition rounds, and besides, there was no honor in crushing something that couldn't fight back. He looked at her across 100 meters of arena sand, and something in his expression shifted. He had expected fear. Every challenger showed it, the widened eyes, the elevated breathing, the micro-tremors in the extremities that his species could detect at distance. Kale Veyron had spent 6 years watching fear on other faces. The human's face showed nothing. She was looking at him the way a mechanic looks at an engine they've been asked to diagnose. Patient. Clinical. Interested. The start horn sounded. Kale moved. For a Dravani champion, movement was a statement. He crossed 40 meters in under 2 seconds, his natural weight augmented by the arena's micrograph field, building kinetic momentum that could crack reinforced plating. He led with his favored opener, the resonance discharge from his left secondary limb, a focused burst of bioelectric energy that his species could generate naturally and that he had spent years training to precision direct. At a distance of 15 meters, the discharge was enough to stun a Quetzal through their chitin. He fired. What happened next was replayed, in the years that followed, more times than any other moment in Conclave history. The human moved into the shot. Not away. Not to the side. Into it. She dropped her center of gravity in a single sharp motion, closed the distance by 3 meters in the time it took the discharge to travel, and caught the energy bloom at its focal point, not with a shield, not with a deflection gauntlet, with her hand. The grip tape on her palm, standard Terran anti-static training material designed for use in high electromagnetic environments, absorbed and redistributed the discharge across its surface. The energy crackled up her arm, arced harmlessly across the bodysuit's built-in static channeling, standard issue, designed for Deathworld electrical storms, not combat, but the principles translated, and dissipated through the magboot grounding plates into the arena floor. The crowd had no sound for what it had just witnessed. Kael Veyron had no sound for it either. He stared at her. She was still holding his wrist. She had closed the remaining distance in the microseconds after catching the discharge, moving through it, not stopping, and her grip on his secondary limb was precise. Not squeezing. Not struggling. Just placed. 2 fingers on the tendon cluster that controlled his discharge gland. Light pressure. Enough to make it very clear that she could apply more. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said. Her translator rendered it in Dravani with the correct formal register. "But I want you to understand that I could have." "So could the next human you meet? Or the one after that?" She released him and stepped back. Her breathing had elevated slightly. That was all. The silence in the arena lasted 6 full seconds, an eternity in a venue designed to never stop moving, where the broadcast systems filled every pause with ambient music and commentary. 6 seconds of 200,000 beings unable to make a sound. Then the upper rings erupted. It was not the controlled applause of a sporting crowd acknowledging a point. It was something rawer than that, the kind of noise that escapes from beings who have just been forced to revise something they thought they understood. It crashed down from the terraces in waves. The gamblers who had put credits on Veyron's decisive first-round dominance were making that noise. The dignitaries in the lower boxes were making that noise. The praetor of the Keth Alliance, who had not made an undignified sound in public in 30 years, was on his feet making that noise. Kael Veyron stood in the middle of the arena floor and looked at the human standing 3 meters away from him. The discharge from his secondary limb could scar Durasteel. He had used it to end matches in 2 seconds. He had used it to make experienced fighters flinch before he fired, just from the threat of it. She had caught it in her hand. With training gloves. "What are you?" he asked. The translator rendered it without the formal register. The question came out raw, the way a child asks something they don't have the vocabulary for yet. Mara Ellison looked up at him, she had to, given the height difference, and her expression was not triumphant. It was not contemptuous. It was something he would spend a long time trying to categorize afterward. Patient. Calm. Already thinking about the next problem. "We're from a death world," she said. 3rd planet from a G-type star. Gravity 1.0 standard. 70% surface water. 112 distinct ecosystems, most of them trying to kill everything in them. We've been adapting to hostile conditions for 200,000 years. She paused. "We're new to the coalition. We know that. We're still learning how things work out here." She looked around at the roaring crowd, at the stunned dignitaries, at the replays already cycling on the arena's broadcast screens, her hand closing around the discharge bloom, the energy arcing across her palm, the calm, inevitable step forward. "But we thought it was important," she continued, that you understood what you were dealing with before the introductions were finished. She turned and walked back toward the tunnel. Behind her, Kale Veyron, 47 consecutive victories, 6 years undefeated, the reigning champion of the open circuit, stood in the sand and watched her go. Around him, 200,000 voices were still making the noise that beings make when the world has just gotten larger than they thought it was. He would request a rematch, eventually. A real one. A full match, full rules. She would win that one, too. But that was a different story.